So today I'm going to be repainting this small forest painting I did a few years ago, and the reason is because at the time I was trying to reserve my colors and my values, so I wasn't being very colorful and I wasn't using the full range of values. My lights weren't super light and my darks weren't very dark, so everything is kind of gray and dull, and this painting doesn't really excite me. I like the composition, I like the theme and the subject, the light coming across through behind the trees, but it's missing that kind of excitement of being in the forest, that feeling. And that's kind of what I want to capture while I'm repainting this. So this was when I was reserving my values and my color and color temperature. And this one, I was not. This one was using a full range of color, temperature, warms and cools, darks and lights. We can see it's a lot more dynamic, a lot more exciting, and that's what I'm going for this painting. And I'm using this painting, this smaller painting, much more recent painting, as kind of a design key. And that's something I learned in college doing graphic design, is having a design key for what you're doing. And it's basically like having some kind of reference where you use that reference for some aspect of the design. So when I'm losing my way on this painting, if I forget what I'm trying to go for, I can reference back to this and go, okay, yeah, I want to capture this kind of lighting effect, or this kind of color temperature complements. So this is kind of my design key, and there's also one more painting here, very similar type of lighting scene as well. Much more colorful, much brighter, darker values, just more exciting overall, and that's what I hope to do with this painting. So let's get into it. Okay, so I'll quickly talk about my palette here while I'm getting some of the colors prepared. So I'm using titanium white, caveum lemon, alizarin permanent, transparent red oxide, ultramarine blue, and ivory black. Kind of a limited palette, but basically just the colors that I need for this forest scene. It's not going to be too complicated. And what I'm using here, I have two different whites, is I'm using, one of them is a quick drying white and one of them is regular titanium white. I'm going to mix those together. I've found that the quick drying white dries way too quickly. So I kind of add in the other white to help it not dry as quickly. Same with the black, but this one doesn't seem to dry too quickly. So I'm using a quick drying white, quick drying black. Okay, so now I'm pretty much ready to go. I can mix up a few piles of color if I need to. So I can kind of use these small paintings as a reference, like, okay, those are kind of greens that I want. That's kind of the light of the color on the trees that I want. Things like that. So I'll use this as a reference as I'm mixing up some colors, but right away I'm gonna get right into it. All right, I think that's a good range of browns, greens, things to start with, and as the painting progresses I may mix up some more kind of red oranges for the trees and stuff, but I think for now, I think we're good. So let's get into the painting. Before I start, real quick, I did want to mention these are kind of the ranges of brushes that I'm going to be using. Anywhere from a number 2 to a number 6. I feel like a number 6 filbert or a flat is pretty good for this size canvas. You know, I'm not going to need much larger. I can get pretty good size strokes from this size. And if I need to, I'll go down to something to like a number 2 to get some small areas. But I probably won't touch the number 2 too often. So I basically use number 4s or number 6s. So anywhere between that, if you have 5s or 3s, those are good too. So for this size, like a 6x6 canvas panel, these are going to be a good size to use. All right, so before I begin, I'm actually going to oil out the surface of the painting, and what this is going to do is just kind of give me a little bit of oil on the surface and kind of rehydrate the painting, so to speak. You know, it kind of just gives you something to paint into. Normally I would use this little medium cup, but mine has a bunch of dried oil in it. It's unfortunate, so I need to clean this out. So instead I'm just going to do it right on my palette here or down in the corner. And I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of oil. So I have just a little glass eyedropper, and I'm just going to squeeze some oil out. And then I'm going to squeeze some solvent. And in this case, I'm using Gamsol. Now I have that little puddle to work with. I'm going to take a brush. You can use a bristle brush, any kind of brush. And I'm going to paint this on the surface of the painting. And you'll want to look at the painting from different angles to see if you're covering the whole surface. And basically what this is doing, what I'm going to do, and I've read this in many oil painting books and manuals from the past, from 1700s, 1800s. And what they say to do is to oil out the surface of the painting. And you do this, you can do this if you're doing multiple layers on a painting and you're coming back to it the next day and it's completely dry. This is what you would do. You would oil out the surface. And then what they say to do is to leave it on there for about a minute or two, and then to use a lint-free rag to wipe it off. And that's just removing the excess, because you don't want a lot of medium in with your paint or anything like that for the most part. So, okay, I think I got that completely covered. So I'm gonna let that sit there for about a minute or two. So I don't really have like a lint-free rag or anything. Normally, I've done this before and I just use paper towels, and if you do it very gently, you won't get a whole lot of paper towel fibers, or really any at all, on your painting. All right, so now I'm just gonna wipe it off very, very gently. And you can see the surface of it is still wet. You know, it's not gonna wipe off completely, but what I'm doing is just removing the excess medium, because we don't want excess. Everything in moderation, right? So that's what we're going for here. You know, I've read in the oil painting manuals, those books, they say to use like a silk rag. And I'm not really sure how you clean silk or if you can reuse it. This might be something I experiment with in the future. But for a small painting like this, I will just use a paper towel. All right, so I think I got as much excess that I can get off as I can. And basically for a painting, redoing a painting like this, repainting a painting, or even if you're just doing a second layer, you know, I'm completely redoing this painting. So it's not really like doing a second layer, but I'm just gonna start it like I normally would any other painting. And I use paint straight from the tube. There's already a little bit of oil on the canvas, very minimal. So that's kind of making the next layer a little bit more fat. For the fat over lean rule. But I'm just gonna block in like I normally would. So, and I have all this information on the canvas here to kind of guide me. So it's basically trees with background foliage and the ground with some areas of light. So I can really pick anywhere where I want to start. I can start with the trees. These are all mostly in shadow. There's probably some light on some of these. I might invent some light on the trees as well, because if there's this much light in the forest, there's definitely going to be some light on the trees. So that's something to think about as well. So I'm kind of just thinking of what to do before I just dive right in as well. But let's start in by blocking in some of these trees. I'm going to start with just kind of a neutral mid-tone type of value. So I'm not going to start with the darkest dark or the lightest light. I'm going to keep it neutral, and that will give me an idea of how dark or how light I need to go. I think I need to darken this mixture up a bit. I do like the values of the trees in this painting, so I'm going to darken them just a bit. There we go. So some of this I could keep some of the original painting showing through if I wanted to, but for now I'm just going to cover most of it. And like I said, I'm trying to get a thicker coverage of paint this time. And I'm trying to be mindful of my edges and stuff, but I just started, so I'm kind of just getting warmed up here. But I'm definitely paying attention to the drawing. That's the important part at the moment. So this drawing. And it looks like it gets darker there at the bottom, so I'm going to leave that for a second. I'm going to add some warmth here slightly. It's a little hard to see that. Because I do want some variation on these trees, and I do want some parts to be lighter, some to be darker, and I can fix anything as the painting goes on. I can use the foliage in the background to kind of overlap some of the trees and fix up some of the shapes, and that's what I plan on doing. That's why I did the trees first, even though the background, you know, I usually do the background first and then move forward, but I'm going to use that background to kind of sculpt some of the tree shapes and you know, overlap the trees, just try to make it look as realistic as possible, as wild as possible. You know, this is a redwood forest, so this is like a wild, ancient forest. So that's what I want to keep in mind. So you can see here I'm keeping the colors very solid, very blocky. There's not much depth going on. I don't have the darks filled in yet. A little bit of variation here and there, some warmer areas, cooler areas since I'm adding some warmth. But I'm not getting too caught up in anything. I'm not committed to anything yet. These are just the beginning stages here. And I'm just adding variety to every stroke basically, or at least trying to. And painting landscapes is so fun, man, because it's just so wild. You know, you can add so much. You don't have to be so precise like portraits that I've been doing lately. The portraits are just, you have to be very precise. So I think as these trees go back further, I might want to add some blue to them. And also some lighter browns. Basically cool them off a bit. And what that's going to do is give it a little bit of depth, hopefully. Like for this tree back here, I definitely want that to be grayer and cooler, because I want these warmer trees to come forward and then this to be, I'm going to push that back. And also the shadows on these trees back here are going to be much cooler, because I think I want a little bit more depth than I had in the original painting. And I want to take note, like this tree was mostly covered, so I may want to keep that, even though I'm painting right over it now. It's something to keep in mind, because I did like the composition that I had. So some of this is like, you know, using your memory, but also being open to try new things. Okay, maybe I'll cover up this tree that's dead center a little bit more. Maybe I'll cover up this tree, you know, playing around with things. I'm not committed to anything. But now we can see, I think that's a much stronger silhouette than what we had before. But I haven't put in the darkest darks yet. Kind of transitioning to the ground now. And I kind of want it to be slightly cooler in areas, because some parts are going to have some blue sky being reflected down. It might even be a little bit lighter because the ground is facing upward. It's facing the canopy, the light, and the trees are not. So I'm going to experiment here, make that a little bit lighter. So just adding in some like interesting brush strokes. I mean, this is like, you got to just let go of all fear here, because at the end of the day I could wipe all this off and go back to the original painting for the most part at the moment. But you got to get rid of the fear, because this is This is the time to experiment, have fun. If something doesn't work, just wipe it off or paint over it again. So I think I like it being cooler and lighter. That looks a lot better, I think, especially as it's going further away. So that's what I'm trying to get, is a little bit of depth. A little bit of depth there. All right, so I think I got enough filled in of the trees and the ground, so I'm going to move to the foliage, and then I'm going to attack these lights and then start adding darks and lights to the tree. I found what I like doing now is I like to start off with neutral, or not neutral, but start off with mid values, and then I can add darks and lights to those mid values. Hope that makes sense. So I'll start out, these values are probably like, I don't know, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, 4 on the value scale from 1 to 9. And then now I can go back on these trees, I can add in the darkest darks, and then I can add in lights, move, you know, create lights and create shadows. I kind of find that's a good way to work for the most part. Sometimes it doesn't work out that easily. So this is the time I'm going to work on this foliage, so I really want to plan this out. There are some cools in here and there are some warms. The main light is right around here. That's where I want the main light to be, is up in this corner, kind of shining through. So I definitely want to enhance this area, make this area a lot more cooler. And I'm going to refer back to kind of my design key, my painting key that I talked about in the beginning, that has that very bright foliage and stuff. But for now, I'm going to go for this mid green, maybe warm it up slightly. You know, I'm trying to get just different colors on the brush so that it's not completely one solid color. So I have a mixture going there on my brush, and I'm just gonna see the difference there. Putting that first stroke down, it's like, wow, that, even though it may not be totally realistic, I mean, obviously the leaves in the forest may not be that bright of a green. They may be much more subdued, but I'm going for a feeling, and this may be too bright, I don't know. But I'm gonna try it. I'm just gonna go for it. They may have more red in them usually. You know, we can add a little bit of red in here, because there are some like pine needles or you know, dead leaves and stuff that give off this kind of richer, warmer, there we go, kind of a warmer vibe. So I'm definitely gonna, you know, knock some of these back. I'm not gonna keep it all bright lime green like that. But it is interesting to play around with, have fun. I mean, not every painting has to be super realistic. I think some of them can be emotional and just kind of evoke some kind of feeling. And the way to get a feeling like this is through the colors and the values. And obviously the subject matter plays a role in that. But, you know, getting, you know, this type of strong colors, strong brush work. So it's looking a little wild right now, but I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to go into some of the cooler greens now. And we're going to add in some cooler ones here at the bottom. In the redwood forest, there tend to be like ferns growing and baby redwoods sprouting up and stuff. And they tend to have a much cooler foliage. So sometimes here at the bottom, I'll put in like a cooler, darker foliage. And we definitely want it to be much cooler back here. And that's a great, you know, once I start balancing out all these warm lime kind of yellowy greens with these cools, I think that's when the painting's might come together a bit more. So I'm not panicking here. I'm just trying to plan out what I'm going for, trying to keep the goal in mind. Adding some variety to my strokes here again. Getting cooler and lightening up as it goes back. And if you've ever been to a redwood forest and you look off into the distance through the forest, I mean, you'll see some amazing like blue greens and stuff just with the atmosphere. It may not be this strong, but it has this feeling. It's like, wow, it's like that strong. You know, it just feels that strong. So that's what I'm trying to capture. And I'm just trying to keep that in mind. I'm repeating it over and over because I'm trying to keep that in mind because that's what I set out to do at the beginning. And I think sometimes we can get caught up. We forget what our initial goal was, and we end up just painting off into the sunset. We forget like what the goal was. You know, we end up just trying to be super realistic when we weren't really going for realism, or we weren't going for like, you know, super realism. This is kind of me just having some fun on the canvas. And, you know, I've done so many landscapes and so many forest scenes like this, and each one I'm just trying to have fun with it, trying to find something different that I can add to the next one, you know. These greens are looking almost psychedelic. It's very bizarre, but I mean, when you go into a forest like this, I mean, it can be a psychedelic experience, and it's pretty, it's just an amazing experience. If you ever have the chance to go to an old forest with giant trees, or just any forest in general, I mean, it's just an amazing experience. So I noticed I got some strong brushwork over here, but I kind of lack that strong brushwork back here. So I'm gonna get some thicker paint and kind of go back into that a little bit. You know, I don't want to attract your eye back here, so I don't want too much of it, but you know, just a little something. I like trying to use thicker paint. And you know, when you go to museums and you see these old master paintings, and they really lay the paint on thickly, so and see, eventually as this goes on, I'll just, you know, move that in front of this tree. I can do a stronger stroke there, you know, over that tree. But I'm not gonna go too far into that right now. That's kind of finishing touches, I think. Right now I'm focusing on the overall color scheme and how the painting is looking. And you can just see the light down here that I had earlier from the beginning stages, and this is way brighter than the light shining through. So already it's just a completely different painting. And I may have gone overboard with the greens a bit, but that's okay. I can always knock those back down. It's not a big deal. But I say go for it, you know. I'm going for it at the beginning. I'm just going to try it out. So now I'm going to add in this light, and then start working on the light of the trees, and that's going to make the whole thing come to life. So right away, that's what I forgot to do actually. I forgot to mix up some very that's where the medium was. So I'm going to mix up some light areas. So we'll take some of this orange, and this is where the sun is shining the brightest. You know, it's coming down, hitting the forest floor directly. That's what I want to show. But to be honest, I don't want to put this light down first. I want to add some steps, some stages before that. I need a setup before I add that light on to the canvas. Which just means I need some darker values for that light to kind of sit on, and that way it'll look realistic. So maybe something like that. There we go. And that'll also work on the trees as well. These kind of 3 colors here. Some of this may go on the ground. You know, I don't know about that. So we'll see what happens here. This I can use as foliage, kind of get some of that red. I can add a little bit more red to that as well. So let's go for some light on the trees. Let's kind of, I'm going to invent some of that here. So let's see if the light's shining through between these trees, these 2 trees, and this one. There's probably going to be some light hitting, possibly this small tree for sure. Maybe back here. Maybe midway down this tree is when it starts. So I'm just creating light spots on the trees right now, and then as it progresses, I'm going to add lighter areas within these spots. Hope that makes sense. You guys will see here in a second. Man, this is a wild painting. I've never done something this wild of color, but I like it. It's pretty fun, you know. I'm just having fun. That's what I think too many people get caught up in, seriousness and creating serious paintings, which I like to do, but having fun, man. Look at this. This is, and I'm gonna leave those kind of 2 back there to be kind of cool off, add some distance. I want this to be the area, maybe some light right there. I don't know if that's even possible, but I'm gonna do it. Okay, we need to move to the ground now as well. So that may be something like this, some kind of, I'm gonna make it a little more grayer for the ground, because the ground is just dirt. It's not like a tree, you know, it's just dirt. So there we go, that looks nice. That looks nice, I like that. I can add in a little bit of green on the ground too, because there's so much foliage bouncing around. There's, you know, reflected light and colors everywhere. There's a little bit of light shining through here, I believe there was. So let's see if I can add something like that in there. I don't know, we'll see. I'm not sure if I'm gonna keep that, but there's a light spot right here too. See if we can kind of connect these without connecting them. Oh, let's go all the way across. Let's just, so you see with almost every stroke I'm just mixing up a kind of a different variety of something. That may not be something you always want to do, but for the most part I try to get variety of colors because it makes it more interesting. So I think we almost have the entire painting covered. I think I'm missing a few areas back here, maybe up there. So, but now we're starting to see the light kind of come together. It's not on the trees yet, but it's almost on the ground. Almost, you know, I'm creeping up to the darkest darks and the lightest lights. So now I can start adding more shadows on the trees. Kind of darken it up. So let's do that. Or let me do that. So I'm kind of going to go into the darkest darks, or what could be the darkest darks. Maybe warm it up a little bit first. And then there's a small tree here. Let's kind of separate it from this large one. So There we go. It's kind of separated now. You know, this tree from this larger one. And I'm trying to just put a stroke down and leave it. I'm trying not to brush over it too much because it kind of just blends it right away. You know, it kind of kills the impact of it. So most of the darkest darks, I've painted these forests so much, like I said, most of the darkest darks are right at the bottom of the trees here. So that's what I'm trying to capture. I'm paying attention to the entire scene. So yeah, I'm paying attention to the whole of everything. I want to be sure that what I'm doing is working with the rest of the painting and the rest of the trees. I'm going to mix up a little bit more dark there. I'm kind of running out. This is just transparent red oxide and black. I can add a little bit of blue in there if I want to cool it off, you know, even more, but I try to keep the darks very warm. I could add some alizarin crimson in there. Just give a little more depth to it. That's the only time I've used the alizarin this so far. I thought I would use it more, but I guess with that trans red oxide, I don't really need the alizarin. I didn't think about that. But that's alright, not a big deal. It's not a lot of wasted paint or anything. That stays pretty wet for a long time, so I can use that for another painting. Okay, so let's add some dark on this small tree. Yeah, you see how much darker that is. So let's lighten it up slightly. Don't want to go super dark right now. Okay. I'm also trying to find a core shadow on the trees, so if the light's kind of hitting from there, I'm trying to find kind of a core shadow within these trees, which is going to make them appear more cylindrical. Now as this dark is going back further into the forest, I want to cool it off with some blue, maybe lighten it up a bit. And that's what I'm going to do right now. That's what I want to make sure I get some depth. Just some atmosphere. I'm trying to add some atmospheric effects here. So the darkest darks back on these kind of three trees here. Maybe that's a little too blue. But the only way to test it out is it's so dark on the palette, the only way to test it out is to just put it on there and see if it works. So it might be a little too blue there. But I'm gonna leave it for now. Let's see, I'm gonna do the other trees. It might start coming together a bit. Okay, so very subtle atmospheric effects, but I like it like that, you know. I think it shows, you know, to somebody who's might have a trained eye or someone that looks at it, you know, they'll see that, wow, it's very subtle. You know, it's kind of something I really tried to plan out. And the way I can push it a little bit further as well is I can add like the really darkest dark right here, somewhere in this area, and the lightest light, you know, up in these leaves and down here. So that way all the contrast will be right here, and then it'll push these further back. I can also lighten up some of this here and gray it down, really gray down some of that foliage as well. And that will push everything back a little bit more, even further. So the key word for today is just subtlety, you know, just being very subtle with everything, except for these lime greens. Those aren't very subtle. But it's fun, you know, it's fun to me. I'm gonna go into these, the redder type of foliage, you know, because sometimes you'll see these kind of red pines and dead leaves and stuff. So I'm gonna try to add these in here. It's almost like the color of the trees. So I'm gonna lighten that up a bit. I'm not liking how that's looking. I don't know, I'm just trying something out, just experimenting here. So don't judge me till we see what it ends up looking like. Hope you guys are enjoying this video. You know, I don't put too many long ones out like this, but I figured a few of you might enjoy this. So what I'm going to do, I don't know if I'm going to leave any of those strokes on there or not at the moment. Might have to come back with some greens over top of them, kind of subdue them a bit. So what I'm going to do is, let's lighten up some of this cooler foliage. Maybe gray it a little bit. So to gray it, I'm just adding black and then adding more white. So that's just gonna, white and black makes gray. So I'm just graying it down, lightening it up a little bit. Let's see if that'll help. See, and this is, I mean, this is very subtle stuff. So now I'm kind of getting a little more serious with the finish. Even though this is, it's meant to be a more loose painting. You know, I'm not, this is definitely isn't, I'm not doing anything very realistic or detailed here. This is just having fun. I can also blur the edges of the trees as well, and that's something I'm going to employ here soon. Or deploy, or whatever you want to call it. I can also add a little bit more blue to that as well, like cool it off even more. And then right on the edge here, just kind of really cool that off. So maybe that did something. Maybe it should be darker. I don't know that it should have been lighter. Now that I'm looking at it, you know, maybe I want all the light to be around here, and then as it gets back, get darker. Because if you're in the forest, you know, you kind of look, you're focusing on this light area in the forest, everything else is going to be very dark. So maybe we scrape this off. And see, this is the fun part of painting, man. If something doesn't work out, you can just use your palette knife, scrape off some of the paint. And now I can, I'm going to make like a vignetting effect. If I look at that smaller painting that I started with, it has some darker. I'm sure there's somebody out there watching going, yeah, you should have went darker. I don't know why you were doing lighter. I know, losing focus. So check it out. So I'm gonna go darker with these cooler greens. Still keep them very cool. But I'm gonna go darker, and that's gonna enhance the lighting effect, because that's what I'm going for. I'm going for the lighting effect. You know, kind of this emotional lighting effect. So that's my focus. So let's go dark with these cool greens. It's kind of blue greens. Now, I mean, this is going to be bold. I'm going for it. You know, I can even add some of the darkness right back in here as well, possibly. Just slightly. I'm not trying to overpower it, but so now if we're looking at the whole of the painting now, which you guys can see, I'm going to step back here and look at it. This is looking a lot better now. See, and sometimes you have to just try things out and see, is it working? And you have to be honest with yourself, because you know, some people probably would have been like, well, I don't really feel like fixing it, so I guess it worked. It looks fine. And for me, I'm like, well, you know, I'm not super far into the painting. It's a small painting. Let's fix it. So that's what I'm doing now. So now if I step back and look at that, that's a lot better. Really enhances this lighting effect, and when I add on the lightest lights, which I'm about to get into, boom, that's gonna pop. These areas are gonna pop. Add some darkest darks right in here, boom, and then we're good. You know, I'll probably have to fix up this area right there. So I'm gonna move to this small brush now, because I want to get into these lightest lights. And I'm going to slowly creep up on them. So on these trees, I don't know if I want the trees to be as light as the ground. I think I just want some kind of like spotlight effects on the trees. So you see that I have dark and then a little bit warmer, lighter, and then even lighter. And that gives it this kind of step value effect, this kind of tiling value effect. So I'm just taking my time here, trying to plan out like, okay, what's going to look good? Where do I want, you know, because these light areas, this is the focal point of the painting. So I want to make sure I'm putting things in the right area. And I'm going to go a little heavier with some of the paint here. Or at least try to. I want thick paint on this. And sometimes I don't have to go all the way down the tree. I can have like a few different little spotlights going on. So I can have like two different areas of light going on there. And I can soften that later as in a few minutes. Okay, I want to add more of that actually. Boom, right there. Alright, so I like how this is coming out so far. I'm gonna add a bunch of branches as well, and that's really gonna help bring it to a finish, because in the earlier painting, if you guys remember, there weren't really any branches at all. And that was more realistic. In this forest, there wasn't a lot of low branches, but I'm gonna add them because I want it to look realistic. You know, I want it to look realistic, not actually what reality was. So, just trying to soften some of this. Some of these edges now. You know, there's different ways of doing it, but sometimes you have to just go in and very lightly touch an edge. I can do the same with the tree here. I can just kind of fix up that edge a bit. Clean it up. Can really soften in one spot, keep it sharp in other spots. So I'm really focusing on kind of edge work now, kind of bringing some of these, bringing some of the foliage together. I might start, you know, overlap, bringing some of the foliage over the trees now, and that's going to start really bringing a lot of things together. Also, I want to make sure that if they do overlap some of the trees, to have some darker foliage as well, because if it's over the trees, it's going to be in shadow behind it most likely. So I want to make sure that I have that covered. You know, so I'm not worrying about detail here. I'm trying to make it look, trying to get a realistic looking effect. Not trying to overdo it. I think that's about as much as I want to go. But you know, there is a lot of foliage. Let's cover up more of this tree like it was at the beginning. Try to bring in some more foliage. So that pushed that tree back a little bit further as well. Something else I like playing around with too, one thing here, I'm going to experiment a little bit. So I'm going to get some transparent red oxide. I'm going to go into, get a little more rich and warm. Maybe a little touch of yellow. And then right on the edge of where the light hits the ground, let's get it a little bit thicker. Trying to use thick paint here. Make sure we have good coverage, and then I'm going to do right on the edge. This is kind of as a transition. It might be a little too light. I thought it was going to be too dark, but what this does is soften that edge of the light, and it can also give it like the impact that it's a warm light source. You know, I might need a little bit more yellow in that. And like I said, this is an experiment. I've done this a few times, just playing around with it, and I don't know that I ever got it how I like it. But it just adds a little bit of variety to the light. There we go, I like that a little bit more. There we go. Looks like one area that I still missed was right here. One thing I want to do is add some, this is going to really bring it to life, I hope. So adding some reflected light onto the tree to show that it's kind of light bouncing off the ground. So light bouncing off the ground up into this tree. Something like that. So I'm almost on the home stretch of the painting here. This is getting pretty close to being done. Just working out a few things, taking a look at it, stepping back, getting a fresh look. And then after assessing kind of what needs to be done to it, you know, just start adding that in. And I think right now I'm going to go with the smaller brush again, the number 2. And I'm going to go with some very bright highlights now on the ground and in the foliage on the trees. And these are going to be used very, very sparingly. You know, probably this might be the only highlight on the ground. I don't even know if I'm going to do it that bright. It looks so bright. But I'm gonna go for it. Just getting it a touch bit darker. Thick paint. We want thick paint for this light. And that really glows, man. That just, I don't know if it fits in the painting. We're gonna have to wait and see here in a second. I think I'm gonna put one more. I know I said I wouldn't, but I'm gonna do one more just to give it a little more consistency. Slight bit there. Now I'm not gonna keep the edges that hard. I mean, that's a little too bright, too hard. But I mean, that's really the effect. That's what I'm going for light in the forest. That's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. It just hurts your eyes, you know. That's the look I'm going for. So now what I'm doing is I'm trying to blend that out now. So I mixed up a slightly darker tone. And I'm going to use this because I realize what's on the ground is very dark comparatively, so there we go. That's what I was looking to do. Now I got to be careful because I don't want to mess up the light that I have going. So So I'm going to do that with the other light spotlight as well. There we go. That's that light effect that I was looking for. That's it, man. Wow. Okay. Let's see if I can add some bright foliage or if it's going to kill it. I'm going to have to use this very sparingly as well. That might be too bright for the foliage. I don't want it to detract from the light that I have on the ground, but so I'm going to do a little bit more of the foliage because I kind of like that. I don't want to do too much because I know as soon as you start liking something, you end up just putting it everywhere. But I want it to look realistic. I want it to appear like, okay, this light is just streaming through the forest, coming down and lighting up all the foliage here, all these leaves and stuff. And now what I'm noticing is like the light kind of stops right here, so I want to kind of gradually, I'm going to add in a little bit of light back there, lighter foliage, not super bright, but kind of that mid-green value that I started with. Going to add some of that back in here just to give it, you know, we want a little bit of variety. Just a gradation of light and stuff. Not a complete cutoff of light. Okay, that's a little bit better. That's a little bit better. I like that. This is a little too bright. It's kind of distracting me. I think I'm pretty happy with that. One last thing, I'm going to try to put in some darkest darks. And then I'll take one last look at the painting and see, does it need anything else? And I'm sure you guys could tell me, but I won't be able to hear you because you're watching it after I did it. So let's put some darks in right there. It's already pretty dark, but it's getting more of the effect of like bark, tree bark. You know, a little variation of life and things happening. Let's add in a little bit of dark back here because kind of got too blue there. Okay, one last, what was I just seeing? Here we go, a little bit more darks right here. Okay, now I'm doing finishing touches. There's some light streaming through back here. So we'll add that. And then there's a little bit of spotlight right there. So I'll keep that. Don't want to forget about that. All right, folks, I think that's pretty much it. You know, I could probably soften some things, but otherwise I think that's a pretty solid painting for repainting this. Came out really well, I think. You know, a little strong on the greens, but hey, I think you just got to go for it sometimes and see what's going to happen. You know, I can always let this dry for a few days and then go back over the greens again, kind of knock them down, maybe add some of the reds back in there that I want. Other than that, I think it's pretty good. Yeah, see, I can add, you know, little touches of red. Actually, I want to add in some branches. I think adding in some branches is going to really bring this together. So let's do that 1 second here before I end it. And I'm just adding in some of the red foliage there, trying to give some kind of variety. All right, let's add some branches before I end this. So I'm going to get kind of a smaller, thinner brush, number 2, but this is kind of like a pointier round brush. And I'm just going to do some dark, or maybe halfway dark, branches. And then that's pretty much going to be it for this painting, because I don't think there's much more I could do to it. I'm kind of happy with it. Let's fix up this line there. There we go. And now, some branches, so I think... And pretty much with every branch I have to come back and get a different... get more paint, because I'm dragging through all this wet paint, so I got to be really careful. So this is where it's going to come together and really look realistic, because I'm putting in stuff that's just going to look real. This is what's going to give it that kind of real look. Because you know, in a forest there's just hundreds and thousands of branches and all kinds of stuff going on. So if I just give a little flavoring of that, like, okay, here's some branches going across, that's what's going to bring it together. I'm going to bring all this paint to one pile. There we go. Now I can work with that a little bit more easily. And I'm making sure I'm not just starting at the edge of a tree. Sometimes I'll start in the middle of the tree and have a branch kind of point down or point out. And that's going to show that they're coming at different perspectives, different angles. And actually, one last thing I'm going to do after I add all these branches is add a little bit of foliage on top of them. That way it doesn't look like all these branches are in front of all the foliage, if that makes sense. We want some of these branches to sit behind some of this foliage. Hope that makes sense. And some of these I can get rid of, but like I said, more of these branches, it's going to start looking a little bit more realistic. And almost done here. I don't want to go too branch crazy. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Now let's add a little bit of foliage. So I'm going to get some of the, just of these mixture of greens and just kind of dab some of them in the middle. Some of them I'll just kill completely. So what this is doing is giving it a little bit more depth. Trying to show like, hey, some of the foliage is growing on these, from these branches. So I'm getting some dark foliage mixtures as well as some light foliage mixtures. Variety, that's the thing. Variety, but not too chaotic, only where it needs to be. So I may have gone a little too crazy there. So what I can do, and see they all kind of stop right at the same level. So I'm gonna fix that by, we're gonna get a big brush here, or number 4, number 6, number 4 or something. We're gonna get rid of that branch. Maybe get rid of this branch. And now we have that one being the lowest. I can even get rid of that one. So there we go. That kind of feels a little bit better to me, although maybe we get rid of this one too. There we go. So now I'm really focused on bringing it to a finish. So what I'm going to do here now is I can add like some other branches, maybe some smaller trees growing as well around. And this is just going to give a little bit of variety to the ground. I don't want to add too much of this because it gets a little, can get a little crazy. But like I said, I'm trying to create a forest scene. So this is like, I'm trying to show what's going on here in this forest. Like what's, there's things growing, there's stuff happening. Anyway, so we got some things growing now. Maybe some lower hanging branches, just to kind of get rid of, they're mostly up here, but maybe if I concentrate, do some lower ones. There we go. It kind of just gives it a little bit more. And then, like I said, can knock some of these back with foliage. Can add dark foliage. For a lot of these. All right, I think that's done. I don't want to overwork this, and I think I'm really happy with how this came out at this point and where it's at. So I think we call this one done. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this little video. Hope you maybe learned something or just got a little escape from reality for the day. Anyway, leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Take care of yourself. Peace.